Hey, y'all, welcome back to another episode of Kandi Unfiltered, the place where real conversations happen. No sugarcoating, no fluff, just raw, honest talk about faith, life, and the things that truly matter. I'm your host, Kandi Koss, and today we're diving deep into a topic that so many of us can relate to: breaking free from the labels that others put on us and refusing to let our past failures define our future. If you've ever felt like you aren't good enough, like people try to box you in with their opinions, or if you struggle to find your purpose, then trust me, you need to hear today's conversation. My guest is the incredible Dallas Green, a woman whose journey from beginning labeled lazy and not smart to becoming a fierce advocate for education reform is nothing short of inspiring. Here to share her powerful story, how her faith in God gave her strength, how she turned rebellion into purpose, and how she now fighting to change a broken system so that kids like hers don't have to endure what she did. We're talking faith, grit, and advocacy today. And I promise you, by the end of this episode, you're going to feel fired up to step into your purpose and let whatever's been holding you back go. So grab your coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into this conversation with Dallas Green.
This episode is brought to you by Pretties and Grace, a faith-based boutique offering high-quality home decor and gifts at prices for every budget. From stunning vases and greenery to statement seasonal pieces for every holiday, plus the sweetest gifts, they truly have it all. Pretties and Grace has 3 locations, their main store in the heart of downtown Benton, along with shops in Malvern and Fayetteville. You can also browse and shop online at prettiesandgrace.com. A huge thank you to Pretties and Grace for sponsoring this episode.
Dallas, welcome to Kandi Unfiltered.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
I love this.
Absolutely. You know, Dallas, when I was going over your book, because you and I've known each other for a while, and you sent me a write-up of just what was on your heart, I couldn't help but go back to even my own childhood. Right. With those labels, and also someone who is dyslexic. Right. And I don't think they had, when we were growing up, it wasn't really something that was spoken about. There was really no help.
We didn't know what that word even was.
Right. I stayed grounded.
Right.
All the time.
Right.
And I was, it's much like you.
Right.
Said I would never be anything. So I, wouldn't amount to anything.
Right.
But I find that creative minds.
Right. Quite
Purpose rockers. And a little bit of ADHD, but
a lot of that. A lot of ADHD for sure.
That's right. So I'm looking at our menu today, and you grew up in the Mississippi Delta, right?
So Arkansas.
In Arkansas, the Mississippi Delta. Yeah. So talk about that for me.
A lot of poverty, impoverished, illiterate, a lot of. We moved to Helena in the late 70s, and that is right before things started shutting down and things started making a downturn economically there. There wasn't a lot of options.
Right.
And that progressed to get worse as I grew up.
Yeah.
Like my class, there's only 2 people in my class that stayed in my hometown. Everyone else left.
Right.
I think that's older. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That says a lot to me. Yes. So, there wasn't a lot of resources. If you needed to read a book for an English project and you were a procrastinator like I was, you usually ended up in Memphis the night before.
Yeah.
Looking for Cliff Notes, like the book.
Right.
We had to go to Memphis for everything.
I lived in Memphis. Right. We talked about that. I lived in the Cliff Notes.
Right. Exactly. So you understand that, but it was an hour drive. I do not think anything about getting in the car and driving 45 minutes to an hour and a half to go eat somewhere for supper.
Right.
Because I grew up doing that.
Yeah.
And people that didn't grow up that way, they don't understand that you might have a recipe to cook something and go to the grocery store and they don't have the ingredient. And the closest place that you could get the ingredient, an hour away.
Yeah.
So people that over here, we don't understand that at all. So there's a lack of resources like you can imagine, and just it's very depressed. And it used to be, Helena used to be a powerhouse, right, with the nation, not just our state,
Right.
So, and I got to watch that end. And hopefully soon things will be changing. I hear things, rumors, people like to tell me stuff, what they hear that may happen in Helena. So I'm hoping that eventually it'll turn around.
Right.
So, yeah.
So early on, you had struggles and you had challenges because of undiagnosed dyslexia, which, same here.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
Well, I didn't realize I had dyslexia until my son was diagnosed with dyslexia. And as I started to learn about dyslexia from what little resources they were, he's 28 now. I thought, well, this sounds like me. Mm-hmm. But I still didn't understand it. Well, although I guess I grew out of it. But I mean, I didn't grow out of it. It's not something you grow out of. It's neurological. You can address it. You can help rewire the brain. But you still have those tendencies, and I can tell when people are dyslexic, and they don't even know that they're dyslexic. But I know they are, because we just have this little thing about us. Right, it is. But I don't even know where I was going with this.
But they say it was undiagnosed.
Yeah, undiagnosed. Okay, so I remember I was like a star student in kindergarten and first grade. Well, would be a big deal, but I never had any problem learning anything. I didn't even have problem learning to tie my shoes, and that's a big sign for dyslexics. My thing was the spelling, and then math, one where you started subtracting like 12 minus 7. When you had to memorize things. Yes. So rote memorization is a big piece for me as a dyslexic. I have a hard time remembering like a series of numbers.
Right.
The spelling was always horrific. And no one knew what was wrong with me. So, of course, I was lazy because everybody knew I was this smart kid. And then I hit this wall in the second grade. And basically what happens is you read to learn. You learn to read.
Right.
And then after you learn to read, you read to learn.
Right.
So when I made the transition, I hadn't read to learn very well. I can remember, reading the Run, Spot, Run, and those books that were out in the 50s. So I remember coming home with those books because I needed help.
Right.
And I can remember my mom sitting on the edge of the bed with me saying, thee. I just told you thee.
Right.
And I can remember my parents being frustrated, like, why can't you remember it's thee?
It's the. Do you know that I used to get stuck on the word of?
Yes. If, of. Yeah, I used to get, because you have to think of the vowel sound.
Right.
Because you can't hear it correctly. So, and that was one thing when my son, whenever he was learning to read, he couldn't remember the word thee. And I remember losing it on him. And I also remember immediately getting upset with myself. Because you saw me. I remember that I went through that.
Yeah. And my daughter.
Yeah.
So,
I didn't know what it was at that time, but I knew there was something that I experienced, and I had remembered that.
Right.
And he went through it. So, and you experience, when you raise your children, you're like, oh, they had that issue that I had.
Yes. I say my daughter Mallory is like, if you could just like take everything about me personality wise, that is my duplicate.
Right.
She looks just like her daddy, but everything else is me.
Right.
And she used to complain about headaches and stomach aches when she would have to read.
Of course.
And it was being dizzy And, because you feel defeated.
Well, you have anxiety. Right. When you're not good at something, you will do everything you can not to do it.
Not to do it.
That's where you get into the disciplinary problems and their ADHD because they won't sit down at their desk,
Now, one of the things,
all that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you said was that by your teachers and mentors that you have labels placed.
Oh, yeah.
And I did too. And I did by my own parent.
Right. I did
Because I think that there was such a frustration,
right?
Because there was no diagnosis, right?
Right. But there wasn't.
And so that's why I stay grounded all the time because I wasn't doing my best, but I was doing my best.
Right.
But my best wasn't good enough.
Right.
And I was always compared to my brother, who, by the way, was 5 years younger than myself.
Right.
Right. So one of the things, and not my brother's fault at all.
Right. Exactly. He was just book smart.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he was terribly ADHD.
Right.
He was 5 years behind me. So all of that had not caught up. And that was one of the things with like Madison and Mallory, or, all of my kids, I say, do not compare yourself.
Right.
I really tried so hard as a parent to not allow my kids to compare themselves because Madison is super academically smart.
Right.
Right. Now, Mallory struggled because she had dyslexia. I have dyslexia too. But I excelled in sports.
Mm-hmm.
Guess who else excels in sports? Mallory.
Yeah, that's right.
Guess who else is very much a people person?
Right.
Mallory. And so, I would tell her, don't compare yourself to Madison.
Right.
Because you're not Madison.
Right.
God's gifted you differently, and you're going to be amazed by how he's going to use that in your life. Right. And I remember teachers telling me, I was in I don't know if you ever had anything like this happen to you. I was in, let's say, I think it was the 8th grade, and I was doing horrible with history, right? Because
remember all that stuff.
all the dates,
The road memorization.
I knew it. My goodness, it was horrible. So my dad comes up to the school. What can we do to break up her grade? Right. And I don't know if you did this, but because I struggled so much, I was kind of the class clown too.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
You gotta hang out my daughter. Humor, you get him. My sarcastic, you think I just woke up this way?
Yeah, that's right. And so I remember over Christmas break, like 2 weeks out, right, from Christmas break, that my teacher, a history teacher, told my dad that if I would outline the whole history book, right, that I could bring up my grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so guess what I did over Christmas break? I was made to outline the whole history book.
Right.
And I'll never forget, as long as I live, I don't think I'll ever forget this. I took my outline, which was a lot, set it on the teacher's desk. He literally picked it up and threw it in the garbage.
Right. That defeated you. You had worked so hard to do that.
I was grounded all Christmas break.
Right. He threw it in the trash.
And he threw it in the trash. And, but that was my educational experience. And then, you talked about having a teacher that kind of in college, and we'll get to that in a minute, but I remember having an English teacher.
Yeah.
My senior year, my English teacher. And it was because it was so interesting.
Right.
It was because I'm a show and tell learner. I'm one. I'm very hands-on. And so he brought English to life. Right. Everything in his class was acting out. Macbeth, Shakespeare, all these things were acted out.
Right.
And so I learned.
Right. Because it came alive. It was multi-sensory.
That's right. And you said that your father started to really fight against a broken educational system.
Yeah. Well, at the time, when the wheels started coming off of those, I was attending public school. And so my dad started to get involved. I can vaguely remember him going to PTO meetings and, going to school board meetings and fussing because my second grade reading spelling teacher, this is back when we used to get a spelling book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we would have spelling tests and she could not pronounce the words correctly. And she would send them our list of spelling words and she would misspell them. And so, I already have a learning disability, but we don't know that. She obviously has a learning disability too.
Right.
And so my dad goes to the principal and he said, well, I agree, but I can't do anything because every teachers union attorney would be up here if I fired her. And so I remember that is when my parents started talking about, she can't stay in this school. We got to do something. Of course, it was the 6th grade before my parents were financially able to do something.
Right.
My dad drove the same truck until I graduated high school. A lot of kids get a new vehicle when they graduate high school. My dad got a new vehicle when I graduated school because they had paid for me to go to private school, but I was already behind.
Right.
By the time we were in the 6th grade, I never caught up. I was always an average student, but I never did. If you don't have the good base, it's almost impossible to catch up.
Yes.
On top of having a learning disability that nobody knew what was going on, it was just that I couldn't comprehend. You're just like your dad. He can't comprehend. Well, my dad was probably dyslexic too.
Right.
I think about things that he would do and I'm like, golly, he was dyslexic too. And so then that totally changed the way I thought about my dad.
Yeah.
Because he was very authoritarian and we didn't always get along, of course. But then things that he did, and I realized, oh, well, he's that way because he's dyslexic. And here he is trying to raise a family and pay bills and take care of everything. And he has this on him. He doesn't even know it. He's never been addressed. He was an Air Force kid. He moved around. So, he missed things.
Right.
Of learning, radically. So it kind of changed the way I thought about my dad.
Yeah.
He became more of a person to me instead of my parent. It says I identified me as a parent, a dyslexic parent, and not wanting my kids to have that struggle or not knowing what that struggle is or why, like saying the word, not knowing what the word V is. And I remember thinking my mom and dad were so mad at me because I couldn't remember that word. And here I am, I'm doing it again. And I remember thinking, this is a generational curse, even though I didn't know what that was at the time.
Right.
That's something I learned later on as my faith grew.
Right.
But I remember thinking, this is like some sort of generational curse. And I didn't know that that's like a biblical, spiritual thing at the time. I was just sickened.
Yes.
And I didn't know that we were dyslexic or what the problem was, but I could see it affected my dad, it affected me, it affects my son, and then my daughter, or my youngest daughter.
Right.
My middle child could read when she was 3.
Right.
So it was not the environment.
Right.
So I would just completely lose it whenever that would be the excuse that it was the environment, that I hadn't read to my children or I didn't provide them with a learning environment. And I would be like, well, explain this.
Right.
So I always thought it was crazy that we want to put the blame on parents for not reading to their children. But when have you ever been to a school where they said, did you count with your kids? I mean, nobody does math with their child, but they still learn this skill set. And we put that responsibility on the school. But for some reason with reading, they want to flop that back on the parents. And so it's just crazy the way we think about a learning disability.
Right.
Not whose fault it is. The only fault of the parents is the school genes. That's their only fault, really. Because it's a skill set. It's just like any other skill that you
Right. And I do believe that reading to your children is very...
Oh, it's important for their vocabulary and all that. But I'm just saying, that excuse is just ridiculous to me, because we don't say, oh, well, did you teach your kid multiplication tables when she was 4? I mean, it's the same kind of mentality.
Right. Right.
So,
Well, you had a pivotal moment that planted the seeds for you for advocacy, right?
right.
So tell us about that.
Well, it was like everything was happening at once. My son was graduating high school. He had been all through his academic experience was awful because of the dyslexia and because of what the schools were not doing and because of just the mentality and the curricula of it, everything. But there was no information out there. This is kind of before Facebook. He was coming up in school. There was no Facebook group to go right to. And somebody said, oh, well, we can do this and we can do that. That didn't exist when he was growing up. So my youngest daughter was going into pre-K 4 when my son was graduating, and they had passed a law in 2013. And I thought, okay, I won't have to go through this again.
Mm-hmm.
But then I found out quickly that I was going to have to go through it again because I didn't know. I mean, I'd always kept up with politics as far as reading the newspaper or watching the news or maybe paying attention to what was going on in my community. And if it was something I was going to get fired up about, I would get involved. But I didn't understand the process, right? How a law becomes, and how a bill becomes a law.
Right.
And then the policy work that comes after that. Didn't understand that part at all. So I got involved. And that's how I got involved in policy.
Right.
In politics.
So would you, and I remember reading, and I, again, flash back to my own childhood and, teenage years where I became pretty rebellious.
Oh, I was.
I became pretty rebellious because I was angry. Like, why? In my parents' eyes and in the eyes of the educational system, I was never going to amount to anything.
I do, yeah.
Right? And so if you're not going to amount to anything,
What difference does it make?
what difference does it make, right? So I became a pretty rebellious teenager. And I mean, not where I was doing really bad things,
Right.
but I just had an attitude.
You're a misfit.
Yes.
I was. I was a misfit. I was always, I was pretty much going to be the leader. If there was something going on, it wasn't because I was a follower. It was because I was a
yes,
leader.
ma'am.
And the system,
Yes, ma'am.
the system didn't work for me. So I had to figure out what worked for me.
Right.
So, well, that's created a rebel mindset for me.
Yeah.
And I would buck the system, and I would, if, the school in general was going to do something that we didn't like. I mean, I was on student council. I would be one that would stand up and say, we're not going to do this, or we are going to do this, or we're not going to take it anymore.
Right.
Exactly. Well, we grew up with this one, right? Right during your private party, that was me. I would. But if you're leading a protest,
I was leading the protest, right?
there was a rail. It said, "Do not climb the rail," and it was no reason for the sign to be there. I would jump the rail, back and forth.
Right.
Hey, look at me, because I became a stupid rule breaker immediately in life because I found that rules were for people that didn't know what to do. Right, really early on in life. And then my dad, I guess because he was dyslexic too, he would say it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. Even though he was super strict, he would tell me that all the time, and I would just look at him like, "Sir, what are you saying?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Do I need to just try to get forgiveness from you or like permission? But he was kind of that way. School didn't work for him either.
Right.
So he did, even though he was very authoritarian and strict, he appreciated the fact when I would be like, "This, I don't like this."
I back the system in school because if it didn't make sense, right? Like I was asking questions, right? And I would ask I remember in math, I had this math teacher. She had that real high pitched nasally voice, right?
Right.
I would ask 1,000 questions,
Right.
right? And I remember, Kandi, if you don't know by now, and I had to tell you, yeah, there's no other way to explain it. And then that would irritate me, right? And so I probably had a few smart mouth things to say back because you're the teacher, I'm a student, right? And I also was one that I took up for, the ones that would be bullied and right on. Like I was that fierce
Right.
fighter for those that were bullied and
Right. I didn't like that sort of thing.
right. No.
Yeah.
And so, when I talk about rebellion, that's what I was. I took no crap off of them.
Right. I was that way. Well, I think it's a self-defense thing.
Yeah.
The people you look towards for guidance and to lift you up had basically shunned you and said, you can't be anything, or you're not going to do as well as you think you are. Or, they would ask, what are you going to do for a living? And and you would say what it was. And then they would proceed to tell you as to why you weren't intelligent enough.
Or even be in high school.
Oh, gosh, 1,000 different things. I mean, I always wanted to be an attorney because I always wanted, I can remember being a little kid and thinking, I would love to go in a courtroom and just tear somebody up.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've always had that in me, or just set the record straight,
Yeah.
And I think that's because I've been wronged since the day I had to get into the system. The system didn't work for me from the very get-go. So I always was the one that was going to the office, pleading the case, and why this rule was stupid, and we weren't going to do this. I was that person.
Mm-hmm.
And,
well, I went between wanting to be an attorney, and wanting to be a psychologist.
I never wanted to do that. I did think it would be cool to be an interior decorator, and my dad was like, you have to eat.
Shut that down. You like me, you did not want to go to college. Like when you graduated, you were done.
I was completely done. It didn't work for me.
Right.
And I was just...
When I graduated, I was done.
I was too, but we had a community college in Hillite, and I graduated from high school, and I think there was like a week or two, and then they had 2 summer sessions, and my dad said, you're not going to just not do anything. You need to go get a little job and go enroll in summer school. I was wanting to take a break.
Right.
Figure out how to get out of going to college in the fall. So he made me go. And I took 2 classes that first summer session. And it was English and Western Civ. And of course I flunked Western Civ because the lady sat there and you had to write everything she said for an hour and a half. It was a Tuesday, Thursday class, so it was an hour and a half. And, you had a book and you didn't read it, and she would give this test. It would be dates.
Right.
I mean, I can't even remember my ATM PIN code number most of the time because, with the dyslexia, I'm terrible with numbers. So, that was awful for me. And everything was, you had to remember it and then regurgitate it.
Right.
And I hadn't really learned what was wrong to address it.
Yeah.
So now I've learned how to learn things and how my mind works. That at that time I didn't know.
Yeah.
So the comprehension was terrible. The ability to write an essay, question, answer was, I would just go all over the place. So the English professor was good for me. She held me organized, teach how to, put my thoughts down and that sort of stuff.
Right.
I took Western Civilization 3 times at Phillips County Community College for the same teacher. And then I moved up here to UALR and went to school. Took it, gigantic classroom, the auditorium.
Right.
Huge room. And I passed it. I don't know if I finally just heard the information. For so many times. Or what? And I was like, I'm calling quits. And I just quit. I quit. I did everything I could do other than work, other than go to school. I worked, and then I had my son in 1996. And I stayed home with him. I did go back to work, and I just would learn the job get good at it, get bored, need another challenge. That's where I'm at. That's where I've always been. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I learn a job, I learn by doing. But once I learn that job, I know it backwards and forwards, and you can't, I know I'm the authority. I know all about it, but I have to learn by doing.
Yeah.
And once I've learned, I'm ready to level up and figure out another way. And I think,
Another challenge.
right. And I think that's part of being dyslexic and struggling.
Yeah.
We are not comfortable unless we are challenged.
Yeah. I agree with that.
And so it's not all bad. There are good things that come along with it. But you just got to get out of school first.
Well, you actually got out of school with honors, right? Well, I went back to school because you left, and then
I was a single parent in my 30s, and I had two children, and I went back to school. My mother is a nurse, and my aunt was a nurse, and they had always said, you need to be a nurse. And I was like, I'll do anything but be a nurse. But whenever you're a single parent in your 30s, living in a home with your mom and dad, being a nurse looks pretty appealing.
right.
So I went to nursing school, and I did graduate with honors. And I do remember, had no idea. I mean, C means continuum in nursing school. That's what they tell you. C means continuum. I never made a C. I made B's and A's. I never thought about I was going to graduate with honors. Not one time.
Right.
So when our Kathy gown came in, and they gave me a bag with Kathy down, and then the cords were in there, and I thought,
I did it.
I really did. No, I mean, I pulled them out of the bag, and I was like, I just put them in the glove box of my car. Because I thought, did I graduate with honors? And so I went and looked, and I thought, golly, I was afraid to tell anybody. And this is in 2006. So by this time, I was born in 1973. So you do the math. What was I, 37? And I was terrified to celebrate that or acknowledge it or anything. So I just I had him for like a month in my car. And then we got to graduation, and I put him in my pocket, right underneath my cap and gown, because I still thought something is not right.
I made a mistake.
So yeah, I did. I did learn how to study. Nursing school was not easy, and I learned how to study. I learned what worked for me, and that's the key. So as long as there's information out there to have where you can learn how you learn, because everybody is neurodivergent. I've already decided we're all neurodiverse. We all have ways we learn. So I just think that the brain science is finally starting to catch up with education. And for so long, there was a gigantic gap between what we knew about how we learned, our brain worked, and what we were doing in the schools.
Right.
And I think I call it criminal negligence. I think that's educational negligence for an educational institution to continue to teach the same things that they know doesn't work.
Right.
Especially when you look at things like your prison studies, you're talking about 80-something% are functionally illiterate. So the majority of your people are dyslexic and functionally illiterate in prison. That does not mean that they're bad people. What that means is we undervalue the ability for a person to communicate their opinions, their thoughts, their ideas. We undervalue how important that is to people's lives, their self-esteem, their values, their ethics, their morals, everything. And that's a huge piece that is missing out of our society as far as development of people.
Right, right. I think that, in the educational system, which one of the things that I really love about homeschool is that you get to teach to your child's ability to learn, right? Because, we have 7 kids.
Right.
They don't all learn.
No, you got to do 8, 7 different things.
It's just like, and I use Madison and Mallory as an example. There are biological children, and they're 17 months apart, and so they're really close. And Madison, very academic And, you put her in front of her books, she's good to go.
Right.
Mallory, just like me, the world needs to come alive for her. Right? That's how we learn, is the world coming alive for us. And so, my son Corey is autistic. Riley is smart as can be. But he's got to have his kinetic sand and all of his cars lined up.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude,
Right.
but that's how he learns. He can sit there and he's got one hand just doing it in his sand.
Right.
But he's learning and he's
Right.
doing his work. And it's, his mind is engaging. And I believe that our education system is such a failure because you come in and you expect every child to be learn the same. That's how it's set up. Every child learned the same. And that's just not reality. And so for children like the way we were, it sets up a system of failure. And
what it does also, because I used to think that and just stop there with that thought. But what it does also, it also prepares us for when you and I go out into the real world. It's not spoon-fed. There's one problem right after the other in life. And whenever you grow up having to think outside the box to do what everybody else is doing, and you accomplish that, something you learn to persevere.
Yeah.
You learn to overcome.
Yes.
What you think is impossible,
right,
for you because it's so easy for everyone else. So when you get out in the real world and it's not controlled, I have found, it's not the case for everybody, but I have found that I think most people that are really good at academics don't have any problems. They get out, they sail through school, and then they get out in the real world and they just can't. They never had adversity and they cannot budge. I see that happen a lot because I agree. You hear about these kids that are just perfect and they go to college and then the wheels go off the bus because it's not a controlled environment anymore.
Right.
And I will admit, at one point in my life, I used to be very cynical about people that had straight A's and honor roll and all that stuff. And I would say, all that means is that they can memorize stuff.
Yeah.
That's all that means is they can memorize information and regurgitate it.
Right.
And so it makes you very cynical to people that way because I'm like, can they change a light bulb? You got to remember all that, but can they really expand something all? I mean, I'm not that way so much anymore, but I can remember being that way at one point in my life.
Do they have any streets?
They was all those awards and honor rolls and special treats, and I'm like, wow, just as they can remember stuff.
Yeah.
You can have access to knowledge, but I don't know what to do with it. It doesn't matter how. I got a grader for a letter jacket, right? But I got no awards. Exactly, I got the attendance award. And I didn't even get that. Yeah, as I got older, I did my school a little bit. I tried to every chance I could, but my dad kept a tight rein on me. So I think he had GPS before it was even invented. It's called small town.
That's right. So what do you feel like the role of days played in how learning, and leaning into God's given purpose for you gave you the strength and the ability to start advocating for your children? And how did the role of faith come into play for you?
Okay. Well, I was saved and baptized when I was probably 14 years old. Mm-hmm. I was raised in church. The concept of God and Christ and believing in Jesus and being saved and baptized and going to church and reading the Bible, praying, that was not foreign to me. I was raised on that.
Right.
But I don't think I ever exercised. I know I probably called on God and I probably prayed and I probably read the Bible, but until I got to the point where here I was with 2 kids that were dyslexic, nothing had changed in all that time period, 14 years, laws had passed. I didn't know what to do. There's no information. My son was graduating high school and, he didn't know what he was going to do. It was all just chaotic because of his learning disability and his struggle at the time. He has overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's my 4-year-old daughter going in school, same excuses, same everything. And I literally had a nervous breakdown. This is before I was getting involved in politics.
Right.
I was living boot camp, yoga, baseball games, whatever the girls were doing. I was living that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And literally God said, here's a bunch of problems.
Yeah.
And it broke me. I could not imagine something about a daughter having to go through the things that I went through with no answers completely broke me. It's a little different for your son because men work with their hands and make a good living. There's not a lot, and things are changing, but there's currently not a lot of respectable things that women can do working like a man.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want that for my daughter. I didn't want her to go through all the nightmare things I had gone through, the rebellion, not feeling good enough. All of that just because schools weren't set up to teach the kid to read the way she'd learned. It literally destroyed me. And one night I remember laying on my back room floor. You know how a lot of women won't admit it, but you probably would admit it. You know, we lock the bathroom door, lay on the floor and cry.
Yeah. It's the only place we can have privacy in the home and cry. So I was getting that deal, and I had a friend that I went to school with, and she is a speech path, and I probably about went to elementary school with.
Right.
And she is a speech path. And I had said something on Facebook about I need help with my daughter. And she reached out to me and she said, hey, I've got a friend who I know that works with dyslexics, and she's in North Rural. And I literally got up off the bathroom floor and I never cried again out of desperation. But I had called out to God laying there on the floor.
Yeah.
When my phone dinged. I hadn't called it because I literally was like, I can't do this again.
Right.
I can't fight the teachers where they act like I'm crazy for, and they do the same things that didn't work and no one has answers. And I was just so defeated. So I got up off the floor and I started going to anything that I could come up with that had to do with education. At the Capitol, I was there. I started reading my Bible.
Yeah.
Religiously. No intended.
Right.
I mean, I go to church. Other than, I might look at it every now and then. But I really started
Doing it to God's word.
because there were so many things. It wasn't just this thing. It was so many things. My whole life was just upside down at this point.
Yeah.
And so I had started I just pick up the Bible and just open it.
Yeah.
Because I'm dyslexic, so I'm not a big reader.
Right.
And then when you start reading the Bible, the very front of it is very boring. Begotten, begotten, begotten. And you're like, who's what? I don't even know what's going on. They can't say any of these names.
Right.
And you lose interest because they tell, you get saved and baptized. They shove the Bible in your face and you open it up and 4 or 5 pages in, you can pronounce any of the words. So you just lose interest. That's the devil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, I just started opening my Bible and reading it, and I learned, it didn't take me very long, I learned, boy, he's talking to me.
Isn't it amazing how when we surrender and give it really like to the foot of the cross of Jesus,
Yeah.
that
He starts doing stuff.
he does, and the things that we just thought were boring,
Right.
we could not grasp,
Right.
start becoming alive to us because we surrendered that. And it's like the Bible just becomes alive. Right. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, in that time period, this was like in 2014.
uh-huh.
In that time period since then, I truly believe I'm one of these people that I believe God speaks to us through his creation. It's his creation. He has domain over his creation. So I look for faith and signs of God in little things.
Mm-hmm.
So my little thing is a feather.
Mm-hmm.
If I find a feather, I immediately stop what I'm doing, go in the house, or go to my Bible
open the Bible, and what my eyes go to is what my message, what I'm supposed to be hearing at that time. And I know that's crazy, but it works for me. And I've had so many very spiritual, bone chilling type experiences with that. And I will get busy, and, a lot of people do this, and I will get busy and I'll get away from reading the Bible, and I will have the weirdest thing happen. I'll have a feather on the kitchen counter, like I have chickens in the house or something, or a feather in my car seat, or something like that. And that is my trigger,
Right.
to go open the Bible and read. And it's always what I need to hear.
Yeah.
So I got to the point where I absolutely opened up my Bible every day, no matter what, and read, and it was my message. And then I realized that it was opening up to the same things. Well, somebody said, oh, well, that's just because your Bibles get used to opening up to the same things. And I was like, well, give me your Bible. And it would open up to the same things that had nothing to do with the crease.
Well, if I knew I said you're in his classic and you need to hear it over and over and over.
That's right. I comprehend it. But yeah, and he does that still. He will give me the same messages over and over again until what? You're going to have to show me, because I don't know what you're wanting to hear. That you keep going, it. And I had found where, of course, here I am. I'm not a school teacher, and I'm trying to rearrange all the education system because they did teach my kid to read. I'm not qualified for this. What am I doing? And so I literally turned to God, and I learned. I was raised Baptist. I wasn't raised evangelical or Assembly of God or any other type of religion that really professes the power of the word.
Right.
And that is something that I stumbled onto. What is Joe Osteen's dad? I can't remember the guy's name.
I don't.
Is it Joe?
I don't.
It starts with a J too.
Yeah, I don't know because I'm not a Joe Osteen.
I'm not a Joe Osteen fan either. Yeah, his dad had this sermon. And when you have great grandmothers that were at church every time the door opened, Assembly of God and Southern Baptist, they collect all these little things, and I ended up with all that stuff. So I ended up with this little booklet, and it was A Miracle in Your Mouth. And somehow I ended up with that in my Bible stuff. And I'm just started reading it one day, and there's a confession in there, and I started saying that confession. I never done anything like that before, and I thought that was so weird to say. But I had read and I had heard in sermons the power of the word. You speak what and I'm like, I grew up in a very negative environment. The town's negative.
Right.
The future is negative. My dad was negative or a realist. All the possibilities that I could ever do were theorized. It was all negative. So, I was taught to be negative. And I didn't realize that until I started reading the Bible and praying and learning about being prophetic.
Right.
So, things that I used to say, I would never say now. And I truly believe in you can profess things. It will come into vision. That's a huge. There's a how and I get frustrated.
Death and life are in the time,
and I get frustrated and say, you could say things like, "Well, this will never change," or with politics, why you want to deal with that person because that's the way they are. I believe that God qualifies the unqualified. He calls the unqualified. He qualifies them. It puts them in a power. Whether that's a small job or a big job. But I believe if you just throw your bids up in the air and go, well, everybody's bad and you can't do anything with this situation, I think that's what the devil wants. Right? He wants us all to be defeated. So I just keep trying to go forward and say, just use me, God. how you want to use me. And that's what I did with the dyslexia stuff and the literacy stuff.
Right.
I knew I'm not a teacher. I'm not a professor. I'm so I have a really good reading comprehension. I'd read things 2 or 3 times to get it all,
Right.
And just, I knew that I understood the concept of qualifying someone or putting them in a spot to move even people that aren't called. You have to deal with all sorts secular people and spiritual people and evil people. But I did believe that. I truly believe that. I lived that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a huge thing for people. You don't have to be a scholar to get involved in politics and go, you're just as important as anybody else.
Right.
It's we the people.
Yeah.
And, there's a song about where the Spirit of the Lord, there's freedom. And I believe that.
Yeah.
And Frederick Douglass said, he thought he realized he was a slave when he realized he learned to read. Mm-hmm. And, once you learn to read, you're free.
Yeah.
So I took that as making sure people learn to read. And you look at all the bad things that happen to people, like the prison studies. And to me, that's their freedom. And that's their, not me, but me helping them get that opportunity to have that freedom so they could possibly be in the presence of the Holy Spirit, because that is where he is, in the spirit of freedom. So I don't know. I just connected that way. Well, it makes sense to me. One
of our being with that. One of the things, that working with the women that I do, that I'm constantly saying is to not allow your past define your future.
Right.
Don't allow the labels that people have put on you to define who you are, because you are made. You're an image bearer of Christ, right?
Right.
And so don't allow people to put labels on you, because God says that you are beautifully and wonderfully made in his image. We're an image bearer. And so to wrap things up, Dallas, what I would really like for you to talk about is the importance of refusing to let past failures or others define you, right?
Okay.
And then how faith fuels resilience and a passion for justice.
Well, okay, so this is it. I don't want anybody to think I'm being self-righteous, talking about my faith. I want someone to understand how it took me from point A to point B.
Well,
and though I believe in Jesus Christ, died for our sins and rose and went to heaven, I believed in going to church and praying and reading about, but until I actually started learning it and putting it into action, other than just going through the field and stuff, that's when I really saw things happen.
Like from here to here.
Yeah, but I started figuring out how to use it as a resource, because it is a resource.
Mm-hmm.
So I started seeing where people would put me down, and then, God will make you the head and not the tail, right? If you abide by his commandments or if you ask of him. So I started seeing little things like that happen. And then he would reinforce it I would open the Bible and he would reinforce it by showing me a lot of times things that I would profess in that confession, my Bible would open up to over and over again. So it was like reinforcing what I was saying out loud. It was just completely strange. But I have watched, I used to get extremely upset. It's a terrible fit, didn't go my way. It was bad for everybody. And I still can get that way. But I have learned through shutting my mouth and just being quiet and still, and let's just see what God does. That every time something doesn't go my way or what I wanted to happen, now, after I have my little fit, privately, I can get excited.
Yeah.
Because I know he's fixing to do something.
Oh, yeah.
Every time it doesn't work out my way or I've denied something, I get excited now because I know he's going to use that to springboard into something even better that I never even thought. And
Right.
you know, I used to be spiteful and revengeful, and I'm not saying that I still don't struggle with that, but now instead of my immediate response is I'm gonna get back. Now my immediate response is for me to say vengeance is God's.
Yeah.
And let him handle that and walk away. And when I can do that, and sometimes I can't,
Right.
and sometimes I start out that way and it doesn't end that way. But if I can do that and carry it all the way through, it always works out better.
Right.
More than I could ever even dream of. And I saw that happen over and over again with the literacy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't because of I'm this educational guru. It's strictly because God put me in those places to do his work.
Oh, he absolutely. You know, what I want to say is that if you're someone and you, first of all, don't allow the labels that people put on you or define who you are.
Right.
Right. I mean,
Right.
and we're so easy to do that because we take to heart about how people feel about us.
Right.
Right. And don't do that. But take those things those lessons in life and what you're walking through, like you with your child and what I walked through with, you know, abortion and what I, you know, really wanting to help other women and take that. And, you know, I tell these women all the time to not allow your past to define you, but again, you're an image bearer of God, right? Take that and use it for his glory and his purpose.
Right.
And we all have a different purpose that he wants us to play out, right?
Exactly.
With you, with politics, and with me, with helping women that are in crisis pregnancies and helping families. And, you know, it's about life, right? And, but, you know, when God, when you're being obedient to his word and you're seeing that things around you and within your community, you feel very strongly called to be involved, right? And I hope that that's true for both of us, just in different ways, right? But what I want to leave you with today as a message is you're sitting here listening to two women who went through struggles with education, with dyslexia, even having children that struggle with that. And we shed the layers of what
It's like an onion.
it is.
It's like an onion.
And it's painful.
It was.
Of what others thought about you.
Yeah.
And even the labels that your own family places on you, right? And when you understand that you are an image bearer of God and that he has a specific calling for your life and a purpose and a plan, and you really come to the place of surrender to that, he'll give you everything you need.
When you can't fight it.
When you can't fight it anymore. And he will give you your abilities because they are from him, right? But you got to be obedient to walk out that, right?
Right.
We have the option to where we can feel defeated, or we can live with purpose.
Yeah.
Right? And so the decision is yours, but it's yours to really lay at the feet of the cross and allow God to do something with that.
Right.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. So I just want to thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I always enjoy coming and talking to you.
Well, thank you. And you know, for our listeners, I just pray that as you're being faced in life's battles And if you have that within you of hanging on to what others think about you, the labels that have been placed upon you, and where you feel defeated, please lay that at the foot of the cross. And don't allow for your past mistakes or those labels to define you. Ask God what it is that He wants you to do.
He's put you through that you're going through that to get prepared for
Absolutely.
the next thing. And I just think people need to focus on that because nobody's perfect.
Right. And we have something to give. We are something to give.
We're all the body of Christ. We all have a
We have a part. Yeah. And it's part of walking out your journey and your testimony if you will allow God to use that in your eyes. And so that is my prayer for you as we go forward. And if you find yourself really struggling and holding on to those past identities and you need help with that, if you need to pray through that, please reach out to me. It is my honor to pray with you and to lift you up. And you can reach me, of course, through all of my media channels. You can actually call me. My cell phone number is 501-993-6487. I would love to pray with you personally. I want to see you live out God's purpose in your life. And that is what I want to leave you with today. Until next time, stay focused on what that plan is that God has for your life. Shed back those layers of what others have labeled you as. God bless.
This episode is brought to you by Pretties and Grace, a faith-based boutique offering high-quality home decor and gifts at prices for every budget. From stunning vases and greenery to statement seasonal pieces for every holiday, plus the sweetest gifts, they truly have it all. Pretties and Grace has 3 locations, their main store in the heart of downtown Benton, along with shops in Malvern and Fayetteville. You can also browse and shop online at prettiesandgrace.com. A huge thank you to Pretties and Grace for sponsoring this episode.